Most people think starting a new life begins with a big decision, a bold move, a dramatic change. But it doesn't. It begins much smaller than that. It begins with a question. Why? Why do you want a new life? Why are you tired of the old one? Why does something inside you feel unfinished? Because the truth is, starting over isn't about changing your environment. It's not about a new city, a new job, or even new people. It's about a new understanding of yourself. We live in a world that tells us what to do. Wake up early, work harder, chase success. But very few people stop and ask, does this life actually belong to me? And that's where change begins, not with answers, but with honesty. Today, I'm not here to tell you how to escape your life. I'm here to help you understand how to build one that you don't need to escape from. Most people begin their journey of change in the wrong place. They start with what they want to do, a new job, a new habit, a new routine, sometimes even a completely new identity. And if they are a little more thoughtful, they move to how they will do it. They search for strategies, plans, shortcuts, systems, discipline techniques, productivity hacks. But very few people ever pause long enough to ask the most important question of all. Why? Why do you want this change? Why does your current situation feel unacceptable? Why do you believe a different life will feel better than the one you have today? And more importantly, why will you stay committed when things get difficult, when motivation disappears, when progress slows down, and nobody is clapping for you anymore? The truth is, without a strong why, every what becomes temporary and every how becomes exhausting. You can have the best plan in the world, but if your reason is weak, you will abandon it the moment life becomes uncomfortable. And life will become uncomfortable. That is not an exception. That is the rule. When you start with what, you are reacting. When you start with how, you are organizing. But when you start with why, you are aligning yourself with something deeper than emotion. You are no longer chasing change because it looks good or feels exciting in the moment. You are committing to change because something inside you has already decided that staying the same is no longer acceptable. Most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline is the ability to force yourself to do things you don't want to do. But real discipline is not force. Real discipline is clarity. When your why is strong enough, discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like direction. You don't wake up struggling to convince yourself. You wake up remembering what you are building and who you are becoming. Without why, even small obstacles feel like failures. A missed workout becomes proof that you are lazy. A bad day becomes evidence that nothing will work. A delay becomes a reason to quit. But when why is present, obstacles change meaning. They stop being signs to stop and start becoming signals to adjust. The challenge is no longer personal defeat. It is part of the process you already accepted. And this is where most people get stuck. They try to fix their life by adding more effort, more pressure, more external structure. But they never fix the foundation. It is like trying to build a strong house on shifting sand. No matter how beautiful the structure looks, it cannot stand for long. The foundation is always the reason behind the action. A powerful why does not have to be complicated. It does not need to sound impressive or motivational to others. In fact, the strongest whys are often very personal. They come from pain, from dissatisfaction, from a quiet realization that something in your life no longer matches who you want to become. It might be the desire to respect yourself again. It might be the need to stop repeating the same cycle. It might be the decision to no longer accept a life that feels smaller than your potential. When your why is clear, your decisions start to simplify. You stop asking, what should I do today? And start asking, does this move me closer to the life I already decided on inside myself? That shift alone changes everything. Because now your life is not being controlled by distractions or moods, it is being guided by intention. And intention is powerful because it gives meaning to effort. Two people can do the same task, put in the same hours, face the same difficulties, but their experience will be completely different based on why they are doing it. One will feel drained and lost. The other will feel challenged but connected to something larger than the discomfort in the moment. This is why people often give up right before they are about to break through. They rely too much on motivation, and motivation always fades. But a strong why does not fade easily. It stays even when emotions change. It stays when progress is invisible. It stays when nobody is watching. It becomes the quiet force that keeps you moving when everything else suggests stopping. And slowly, without noticing it immediately, your why starts to shape your identity. You are no longer someone trying to change. You become someone who is already in the process of becoming. Your actions are no longer random attempts to improve your life. They become expressions of a deeper decision you made long before results appeared. Most people believe that a new life begins when something outside of them changes. A new environment, a new opportunity, a new relationship, or a new situation that finally gives them permission to become someone different. But that belief keeps them waiting for the right time, waiting for better circumstances, waiting for a version of life that feels easier to step into. And in that waiting, life quietly continues as it always has. The reality is that a new life does not begin outside of you. It begins within you. It begins the moment you become aware of yourself in a way you were not aware before. Self-awareness is not just understanding your habits or recognizing your mistakes. It is something deeper. It is the moment you see your life without excuses, without distortion, and without the stories you have been repeating to protect yourself from discomfort. Most people avoid this level of honesty because it feels uncomfortable. It is easier to blame circumstances, people, timing, or luck. It is easier to believe that life is happening to you rather than through you. But self-awareness interrupts that illusion. It forces you to see that your current life is not random. It is the result of repeated choices, repeated thoughts, repeated patterns, and repeated responses that you may not have questioned for a long time. When you become truly self-aware, you start noticing things you previously ignored. You notice how you react under pressure. You notice what you avoid and what you constantly delay. You notice the conversations you have with yourself when nobody is around. And most importantly, you notice the gap between the life you say you want and the life your daily actions are actually building. This awareness can feel heavy at first because it removes the comfort of ignorance. But at the same time, it is the most powerful starting point for change because you cannot change what you cannot see clearly. And once you see clearly, denial becomes impossible. A new life cannot be built on confusion. It requires clarity. And clarity does not come from adding more information or consuming more advice. It comes from removing illusions. It comes from looking at your life exactly as it is, not as you hope it to be, not as you explain it to others, but as it truly functions on a day-to-day basis. Self-awareness also reveals something uncomfortable but necessary. You are often the common factor in your repeated struggles. Different situations, same outcomes. Different goals, same patterns. Different attempts, same cycle. At some point, it becomes clear that the problem is not only external, it is also internal. And that realization is not meant to create guilt. but responsibility. Because responsibility is where transformation begins. As long as life is something happening to you, you remain a passenger. But the moment you accept that your current reality is shaped by your participation, you become the driver. And being the driver means you also have the ability to change direction. Self-awareness is not about judgment. It is about observation without distortion. It is the ability to look at yourself and say, this is what I do. This is how I think. This is how I respond. This is what I avoid. This is what I repeat. Not to criticize yourself, but to understand yourself with honesty. Because without understanding, change becomes random, and random change rarely lasts. Most people try to improve their lives without ever fully understanding themselves. They try to force new habits onto an old identity. They try to build discipline without knowing what breaks their discipline. They try to create consistency without recognizing what disrupts it. And because of that, their efforts often collapse under pressure. Self-awareness changes that approach. It allows you to see the triggers behind your behavior. It allows you to understand why you quit certain things and stay committed to others. It allows you to recognize that your actions are not isolated events, but connected to your thoughts, beliefs, environment, and emotional patterns. And once you see those connections, you stop living reactively. You begin to respond intentionally. You stop asking what is wrong with your life and start asking what is happening within it. That shift in perspective is subtle, but it is powerful enough to change the entire direction of a person's future. Because when you are unaware, you are controlled by habits you did not question. But when you become aware, you begin to question everything that once controlled you. And in that questioning, space is created. Space to choose differently. Space to pause before reacting. Space to break patterns that once felt automatic. Self-awareness does not instantly solve your problems, but it changes your relationship with them. Instead of feeling trapped inside your circumstances, you begin to see the structure of those circumstances. Instead of feeling lost in repetition, you begin to notice the repetition itself. And that noticing is the beginning of interruption. And in that interruption, something new becomes possible that was not possible before because you were no longer fully unconscious of your own life. And once awareness enters, even slightly, the old way of living cannot continue in exactly the same way it did. Before, comfort zones are not something you accidentally fall into. They are something you slowly build. One small choice at a time, one avoided risk at a time, one postponed decision at a time. At first, it feels harmless. You tell yourself you are being practical, you are being careful, you are waiting for the right moment. But over time, those small decisions create a space that feels safe, familiar, and predictable. And that space slowly becomes your limit. The comfort zone is not always comfortable in the way people think. It is not always happiness or peace. Sometimes it is frustration, dissatisfaction, and silent regret. But even those emotions can become familiar. And anything familiar starts to feel safer than the unknown. That is the real trap. Not comfort itself, but familiarity disguised as safety. Most people stay inside their comfort zones not because they are weak, but because uncertainty feels like danger. The mind is wired to protect you from risk, from failure, from embarrassment, from loss. So it creates patterns that minimize discomfort. It encourages you to choose what is known over what is possible. It tells you to stay where outcomes are predictable, even if those outcomes are not fulfilling. But growth does not exist inside predictability. Growth requires exposure to the unknown. It requires situations where you do not have full control, where you do not have guaranteed outcomes, where you might fail, where you might look inexperienced, where you might feel uncomfortable in front of others or even yourself. And because of that, growth always feels slightly uncomfortable at first. The problem is that people often misinterpret discomfort as a sign to stop. They assume that if something feels difficult, it must not be right for them. But in reality, discomfort is often the first sign that you are stepping outside the limits of your current identity. It is not a warning to go back. It is a signal that you are entering unfamiliar territory. Every version of you that you admire exists outside your current comfort zone. The disciplined version of you, the confident version of you, the focused, consistent, resilient version of you. None of those versions are created by staying where you are. They are built by repeatedly doing things that your current self resists. The comfort zone expands only when you challenge it. Not once, not dramatically, but repeatedly. Every time you do something that feels slightly uncomfortable but necessary, you stretch your tolerance for uncertainty. And over time, what once felt difficult becomes normal. But the key is that it never becomes permanent comfort. Because the moment something becomes easy, growth shifts further ahead. This is why people often feel stuck even when they are trying. They confuse motion with progress. They stay within familiar versions of effort. They repeat the same level of challenge, the same level of risk, the same level of discomfort, and expect a different outcome. But real change requires escalation. It requires gradually increasing the level of challenge you are willing to face. Leaving the comfort zone is not about making dramatic decisions overnight. It is about small, consistent acts of discomfort that slowly reshape your boundaries. Speaking when you would normally stay silent. Starting when you would normally delay. Trying when you would normally delay. When you would normally overthink. Continuing when you would normally stop. Each action might seem small in isolation, but together they begin to rewrite what you believe is possible for you. The comfort zone also feeds on identity. It tells you who you are based on what you have already done. If you have avoided risk in the past, it convinces you that you are not a risk taker. If you have failed before, it convinces you that failure defines your ability. If you have been inconsistent, it convinces you that discipline is not your nature. And slowly, you begin to live according to that limited version of yourself. But identity is not fixed. It is shaped by repetition. And repetition can be changed. Every time you act differently from your past pattern, you challenge the identity that comfort has created for you. You begin to prove, not to others, but to yourself, that you are capable of more than your previous behavior suggested. The most difficult part is the initial resistance. The mind will always try to pull you back into what is familiar. It will create doubt, hesitation, and overthinking. It will highlight risks and minimize possibilities. It will remind you of past failures and current limitations. But that resistance is not a sign that you should stop. It is a sign that you are stepping beyond what your current self is used to. And if you stay in that discomfort long enough without retreating, something shifts. The unknown starts becoming familiar. The difficult starts becoming manageable. The scary starts becoming normal. And in that process, your comfort zone expands. Not because it disappears, but because you outgrow its previous boundaries. What once felt like your limit becomes your starting point. And what once felt impossible becomes part of your standard way of living. Most people think clarity of purpose is something you discover all at once, like a sudden realization that arrives fully formed and never changes again. But in reality, clarity is not a moment. It is a process. It is something that slowly sharpens as you begin to eliminate noise from your thinking and stop living according to every external expectation placed on you. When life feels uncertain, the natural reaction is to move faster, to try more things, to keep yourself busy so you do not feel lost. But movement without direction does not create clarity. It creates exhaustion. Because you can be extremely active in life and still be completely disconnected from where you are going. Clarity of purpose is not about knowing every detail of your future. It is about understanding the direction that feels aligned with who you are becoming. It is a sense of internal alignment that guides your decisions even when external conditions are unclear. Without it, every opportunity looks important. Every distraction feels reasonable. Every path feels possible, which eventually leads to confusion instead of progress. Most people do not lack effort. They lack direction for their effort. They wake up willing to do something meaningful, but they do not know what meaningful looks like for them specifically, so they copy what others are doing. They follow trends. They imitate success instead of defining it for themselves. And in that imitation, they slowly lose connection with their own internal compass. Clarity begins when you stop asking what works for everyone and start asking what feels right for you over time. Not in a moment of excitement, but in consistency. Because clarity is not built on emotional highs. It is built on repeated reflection and observation of what actually moves your life forward in a sustainable way. Without clarity, uncertainty feels threatening. You start doubting yourself every time you face confusion. You think confusion means failure. But in reality,